and he gave me studio time and an engineer on the strength of my really demo in mono on a cassette out of my mum's bedroom.
There must have been something there.
But all I'm saying is this day and age is such a contrast to that immediacy and the fact there was this DIY, slightly punk ethic of how you could put records out and get your music to people. And at the moment, it feels like there are these invisible gatekeepers, hello Meta, who make you pay to reach your own fans. I'm a very questioning person anyway. I think, why am I doing what I'm doing? And is it good enough or is it rubbish? And I go through those sort of like self-critical patterns in my own brain. We all found some sort of freedom on the dance floor or through creating this music or through the scene. Also working with one of the engineers in this little studio above the record label. We got stuck. We'd been in there for hours. I used to work till 2, 3 in the morning. You just don't notice time passing.
Yeah, because that's
die if you have to listen to a whole double album. I can't even listen to a double album of my own music.
Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid Nation. What is Acid Nation? Well, it's a D2C platform, a direct-to-consumer platform. And that means if you're buying music as an artist or a label, or if you're a music fan wanting to connect more directly with your favourite music people, this is a great place for you to be spending your time and your money. Acid Nation do a lot more than your average D2C in this space. They've got a bunch of extra services which you don't find elsewhere. For example, they've got their own pressing plant. They press vinyl on demand, so they can take orders from your customers, press the vinyl and send it straight back to that customer because they've got a fulfillment service too. Pretty amazing. They've also got a streaming platform which pays out 1 cent per stream, not pro rata, just a payment of 1 cent per stream, which is basically unlike anything else in this space. So we use Acid Nation for Hot Flush Recordings, my label, and all of our affiliate labels. We think they're brilliant. We couldn't recommend them highly enough. So head over to acidnation.com to check them out.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, we're talking Faithless on the show this week. Faithless, you've probably heard of them. They're one of the biggest dance acts of all time. And Sister Bliss is the musical driving force behind the act. Amazing to have her on. We get into the new Faithless album, which came out at the end of last year, Champion Sound. But of course, we get into much more than that too. We talk about her personal story, the history of Faithless, the act, the influence it had on the scene, the differing nature of the catalogue, perhaps compared to some people's perceptions of the band, and a lot more besides. So like I said, amazing to have Sister Bliss on the show. Faithless, just one of the biggest acts ever, and a great episode coming up which you're really going to enjoy. So without further delay, let's get into my conversation with Sister Bliss.
Brought to you by acidnation.com.
Sister Bliss, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. Absolutely. How are you doing?
I'm ready for the deep dive.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's not a diving podcast. We used to be called not a diving podcast actually, but that seemed to be, too, I think esoteric for some people, but what can you do? We're here obviously to talk about you and Faithless and various other things around the dancing, I suppose. I want to kick off by just talking about the recent stuff that you've been doing. Obviously, there's been a Faithless album, the first new Faithless proper album for a while, came out a few months ago.
Yeah, Champion Sound.
Yeah, right. Tell me about it. Generally speaking. How's it been going back in the proper album releasing waters? We were just talking off camera actually about how different it is releasing a record these days, but yeah.
It's it's very gratifying to do, because to even have an audience in this day and age where everything is so kind of atomized and moving so fast, and there's this tsunami of music getting released every single day, people to even give a it means a lot. And it was also a great kind of expurgation of music. We had so much music kind of built up. We did release an album called All Blessed during lockdown, which was our first album without Maxi. And of course, none of the usual routes to promote the album were available. So it just lived on streaming, which was really the first album we'd released in that way. There was no touring to support it. There was no one shazamming the big dance tunes. There was some amazing bits of music on there, tracks remixed by the likes of Maceo Plex. I mean, there was the most amazing music I felt on that album. It was a really difficult album to make, not having Maxi on it. He wasn't well enough to be on the album, though. We waited and thought perhaps he would, but it just didn't transpire. So with his blessing, we were able to release All Blessed. which I think was quite an introspective album in certain ways. And then Champion Sound felt like, you know, all this kind of pent up colour in music. And it was kind of a nod to our love of sound system culture, where we came from. We got to collaborate with Jazzy B on All Blessed. So there was that feeling of wanting to, create, I don't know, something that felt like it had its foot in that, you know, amazing mashup culture of UK rave and all the amazing elements that make London what it is. We feel we're very much a London band. Okay. And basically the record label said to us, we're going to press vinyl. So we got very excited about that, being proper old school vinyl heads.
Of course.
And then they said, we're going to do a double vinyl as well as like a special limited drop. So we're kind of like, well, if they're doing a double vinyl, instead of filling it up with remixes, why don't we kind of use the format to inform what the album's going to become? So actually, which sounds so indulgent, but we did a full double album of music. But the idea being we released a side, as it were, digitally each month. So people would get 20 odd minutes of music per month, kind of hopefully fall in love with it. And each side of the record had a kind of story, and you didn't have to listen to it all at once.
Right.
You know, thematically.
Yeah, because that's
die if you have to listen to a whole double album. I can't even listen to a double album of my own music all at once. So that was the idea behind Champion Sound.
Yeah, and that's how it comes up when you listen to it on streaming, right? Because it's actually presented in quite a nice way like that. Right? It's like disc 1, disc 2, disc 3. Like,
that's right. That was the idea. And then when the album itself actually came out, I loved the weight of it. I loved the feel of it. I loved choosing the vinyl. We chose, which was quite funny actually, because someone in the office was like, I absolutely hate that. So I thought, we've got to have that. And it was called splatter vinyl. Because it felt
absolutely
punky and irreverent and this mishmash. And I love that you've got this very kind of, I love the cover. It's basically, for those that are listening and not having a visual element, it's a sound system sort of in a deserted field, and this kind of electric pylon in the background. And it speaks to me of all the raves I used to attend, all the mad parties on the moor somewhere, you know, going in a convoy to find the sound system. And I think a lot of people connected with that. It felt so quintessentially British. But then when you pull the vinyl out, there's this kind of array of colour and movement. So there was a splatter vinyl and a neon pink one and a neon yellow. And I mean, it's all very trifling details. But to create an actual thing, an artefact, felt important, because so much of this digital conversation is, God, it's so ephemeral, isn't it? And it also drives me mad. I hate that we sit in the studio and talk about, it's not going to get on that playlist. If it doesn't get on that playlist,
that's the worst conversation
to
have, isn't it?
You know, if a tree falls down in a forest, does anybody hear it? You know, it feels like that. It feels like to break out and even be heard is this monumental and sort of opaque process. Like back in the day, you could make a record, you get it on the vans. When we started Cheeky Records, we started it out of my living room, in my slight dump of a flat. We have boxes full of vinyl.
I've got a list of questions about Cheeky Records. Let's
but all I'm saying is this day and age is such a contrast to that immediacy, and the fact there was this DIY, slightly punk ethic of how you could put records out and get your music to people. And at the moment, it feels like there are these invisible gatekeepers, hello Meta, who make you pay to reach your own fans. And that environment can do stuff to your mind, you know, make you question. I'm a very questioning person anyway. Think, why am I doing what I'm doing? And is it good enough or is it rubbish? And I go through those sort of like self-critical patterns in my own brain. But I recognise them, and I have done for 30 odd years. So it's not new. But when you get a piece of vinyl, the point being is, it's real, it's there, and it feels like it. Hopefully you can feel the love that went into creating it. And it also contains Maxi's last vocal recorded before he died. It was actually from a really beautiful poem that he wrote, but it never found a place on the album that we were recording it for at the time.
That was the previous album.
Yeah, it's called Forever Free, the track. And I love that kind of theme informs one side of the album, which is the Forever Free side, the first side. And Maxi kind of introduces, that theme of freedom running through it, which I think is something common to everybody in the dance music world. We all found some sort of freedom on the dance floor, or through creating this music, or through the scene, or through following a path that wasn't well trodden at the time, you know, making up our own rules as we went along. So that's a little nod to that. You know, what does freedom mean? And then we asked different lyricists to come back with their vibe on the Forever Free theme. So LSK did this beautiful, he's a long-time collaborator since the No Roots album, solo artist in his own right, absolute genius, works a lot with Nightmares on Wax. And he wrote this beautiful lyric about the sort of freedom you get from the dance floor. Also, Sully Breaks, who's a spoken word artist.
Yeah.
He's a long-time collaborator since the All Blessed album, and it's been amazing working with him as well. So
yeah, I mean, like
a beautiful lyric.
There's two tracks with him on the record, isn't there?
That's right.
Both
yeah.
great. Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I feel very grateful that we got to make this double album and that we got to make it on vinyl.
Yeah.
It was a big deal, you know.
Absolutely.
To do that.
Yeah, I mean, vinyl is it's an enduring format for a good reason, right? Because there is nothing quite like having, I suppose, the size of it, the tactile nature of it, the fact that it sounds a little bit different when you play it, you know, it's just, and, you know, and I think probably it's the natural habitat for dance music generally. You know, I mean,
I love to think it is, but I have to say I DJ off a USB now, so I'm guilty as charged. But, you know, I've got a lot less backache in my later years than I had, you know, throughout my 20s, lugging these silver cases, mashing up my shins, you know, covered in sticky substances. But obviously that represents a whole era of how real it was, how tactile it was. The search for records was my weekly pilgrimage. My life was spent searching for those tunes, having relationships with people, you know, behind the desks at all the, you know, all the shops Absolutely. I used to go to, you know, shout out to like Pure Groove in Archway, which was a, you know, big place for me. That was my
first shot. Yeah. Absolutely.
London all the way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I used to go to school through Archway. So I used to get off the bus on the way back from school, go to Pure Groove Records and
I would stock up.
It was just totally, but as a kid, I was totally intimidated, but so fascinated as well by it. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, yeah, amazing. Really amazing. Let me ask you though, going back to the album, I've spent the last couple of days listening to the whole catalogue because it's a pretty extensive piece of work.
So dedicated. Thank you.
I think.
Have you come out all right? The other side of it.
Well, what struck me about this new record is that it's actually, I think, the most dancey record. It's the most clubby record. Is that right?
Do you think so?
That's what I took away from it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think people are always surprised because we are obviously sort of better known for the biggest dance anthems that were sort of endured across the decades.
Yeah, but they're not really
but the albums are quite quiet in places and more reflective. But I think that's a listening experience as well. We always feel really aware that the album process is, the context for listening to albums is really different from the club environment. Absolutely. And I've always loved the quieter moments or the after party or, you know, just music generally. Our tastes are so wide and varied. And I suppose the point of Faithless was when we met, there was this collision of Maxi's love for hip hop and reggae and Rollo's love for reggae. And then there was house. And then Maxi and I loved Joni Mitchell. And there was like this Venn diagram of kind of intersecting musical tastes. And our first album was like a mixtape. That was the whole proviso for it, was saying, why don't we just, I mean, we're so naive. Oh my God, you know, you stick an opera track and a sort of trip-hoppy track and then a banging house track like Salvamere or Insomnia, all sitting together.
That's the thing, because
one album. It was quite brave and quite ridiculous in one way, you know.
If I could interrupt you, the album, but the original album version of Insomnia, like half of the track, when you listen to it on Spotify or whatever, like it takes basically 4 minutes to actually get to what people would recognise as Insomnia, because it's this, like you say, this mixtape thing, and I love albums that are put together like that.
Come to those who wait.
Yeah. But I mean, I love albums which are like DJ mixes, you know, and which kind of like blend into each other. And
well, thank you for recognising that, because obviously from my world of DJing, and it sounds horribly pretentious, but I am trying to tell a story with the music. I started as a warm-up DJ. I was so aware you couldn't just bang out all the big tracks. You know, to me it was an art form. You know, I would watch. I'd be there raving, but I'd be watching like very intently how things were structured. I mean, trade at Turn Mills was a formative experience for me. The way the night started with kind of Strictly Rhythm, you know, proper American house, very groovy, very beaty. Then that was Malcolm Duffy. Then Smoking Joe would come on and she'd play all this kind of deep Italian music and then get quite tribal. And then you'd get Daz Saund, who'd play this Detroit techno. And then you'd get Trevor Rockcliffe, who's kind of really should be bigger than Carl Cox, in my opinion, the most extraordinary techno DJ. And then Tall Paul, whose dad ran Turnmills, kind of it was quite an amazing venue. And then Paul started DJing after Trevor, a couple of years later maybe.
Okay.
And then went into this anthemic territory. And then, it started at 3 a.m. It didn't finish till midday, sometimes 1 p.m. And people wouldn't, I chatted with Paul recently, remembering the times when people would not go home. It was so electric, and the passion for music, the number of people that would be staring through this little glass door to try and pick up what these tunes were before Shazam, before we had any way of knowing. And all the DJs would put stickers over the records.
Yeah, right.
That's how much of a kind of, there was this, not elitism exactly, but this real sense of trying to create wonder, not giving
mystery, right?
Yeah, mystery, exactly. This sense of we've got something really special, and they're putting it in this context, in this wild nightclub with the best lights, and this sort of sunken dance floor that you feel like you're going into a sort of den of iniquity. So these experiences were really formative for me. So I'd be watching, and then I was always buying records and making tapes because I was so skint. My mate would buy a load of 12 inches and then I'd buy a load, and I'd do like the A side and she'd do the B side. So then at least we both had each other's record collection on a cassette tape. So that's kind of how it all started. But so that's how I love with DJing, just as going to say, sort of forming the albums. We love segueing things together. And you're right, we did really try and do that on Champion Sound. And also that translates to the live set. It's like a roller coaster. It's not like a band who comes on, plays a song, stops, and everybody kind of claps politely. There's no let up. Yeah. There's only very few gaps, just because we'll die if there aren't any. Any, but the songs kind of, and I think about that structure very carefully, when we're in rehearsal, and I think about it like a DJ set. So I love that we can still make records that make that kind of sense.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of received wisdom these days is that everything's got to be singles, everything's got to be, like you say,
2 minutes
easily
long,
fitting
not even 3 minutes
in a playlist and all that kind of stuff, which is like, it's just awful, right? Just to return to Turnmills though, I had a long conversation with Richard Faithless on the show about Heavenly Social, which was that was the club that went before Trade. So Heavenly Social would finish at 3, it would all shut down, they would do a changeover, and then Trade would start. And as a kid, I used to go to Heavenly Social a lot, and a couple of times I went to Trade too, but I was 15, 16, 17, that's that sort of age.
Tough therapy after.
I mean, I've been
traumatized.
This is me working through my scars of the mid-90s. But I mean, it was a great club, wasn't it, Turnmills? Just brilliant, just quintessential.
Very special, and still, pretty underground. It wasn't
totally
commercial in any way. But, I think London was full of those sort of formative places. But I was very lucky because when I started DJing, I would play through friends in different cities, and then they'd ask me back. So that would create a kind of circuit. They go, well, when can you come back? So before long, I had friends in Portsmouth, and I was DJing in Birmingham and London.
What kind of year are we in here?
91, 92. Yeah. And then I started making my own records as well. So that was obviously a big kind of shift.
Okay, you've been watching this episode for 15 minutes, so well done for sticking around this long. I'm just going to take this opportunity to tell you about the ways you can support the show. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/Scuba Official. There are 2 very reasonably priced tiers there. You can also bug us a one-off donation if you so desire over at scubaofficial.io/support. But what we'd most like you to do actually is like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment saying how much you enjoyed this episode, in theory. So thanks for listening, and I'll let you get back to the episode.
Okay, here's a question on that. I was gonna move on to this later, but since you've mentioned it, you're fully classically trained, right? You did a music degree, is that right?
I didn't do a music degree, no.
Okay.
No, I didn't.
Why is
I haven't got any degree at all, actually. I have piano lessons, and it comes out on like YouTube, or not YouTube, on the internet.
Right.
No, I mean, I went to Royal College of Music, which is where MJ Cole went, but just on a Saturday.
Okay.
So I won an award off Haringey to go and have all my music.
So where'd you go? Where are you born?
So just up the road
Okay.
from you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I was born in Islington, but grew up in Gretchen. So yeah, North London.
That was amazing. So
you were a very, very good pianist, basically.
No, I was not very good. I was very good at that age, 14.
Okay.
And then I stopped. I kind of totally went into sort of stasis.
So it was a kind of potential pathway for you to like really good, become a concert pianist, but you decided for whatever reason it didn't happen.
Never in that league.
Okay.
Never in that league. I used to play a lot of instruments. I used to love picking things up and having a go and seeing if I could get sound out of them. Yeah. Then when I discovered Prince, I wanted to be Prince.
Okay.
Obviously not quite got to his levels of staggering genius, but you know, I try. And
it's a reasonable thing.
So I played lots of different instruments, but not particularly well.
Okay.
But well enough to get through an audition. And then I just went on Saturday mornings. But what I did get introduced to there was a guy who I'm thinking now, this is 1984, you know, he was really forward thinking. And he brought in, for some reason I had some sort of music theory with him. Can't remember. It was such a long time ago, but he brought in a synclavier, which is the first like sampling keyboard that like Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush used. Yeah. And had us all making samples. And he had a very early copy of Cubase on an Atari, which is the first program I ended up making music with. So I think that sort of sowed the seeds. Also, I just knew as soon as I got there, I didn't take classical music seriously in the way that my peers did. There were people there playing concertos, like age 12. Yeah. That was not my bag. I loved being in the orchestra. I used to be in a choir. I loved being in amongst it. So I think that informs my harmonic sensibility. But I also, my dad was a jazz player, so I used to play saxophone as well. So I did a load of jazz courses in the community centre before
was he a
I went to music college. He was semi-professional.
Okay.
He still plays now. He's always saying, I've got a gig this weekend. Okay. Sort of like have gig competitions.
But a very good musician, basically.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, very much so. But jazz. And so, and I loved pop music. And I grew up with synth pop and I was obsessed with that. So I knew I did.
It's a good era of pop music.
You have to have a laser focus, I think, to be a classical musician. It's such a rarefied world. Yeah. And weirdly, I used to sit right at the back. I mean, I was that bad when I went to music college and they recognised that I wasn't really going anywhere fast. And I was right at the back. And this girl who used to play the cello sat next to me and we used to just chat and get told off by the conductor the whole time. She ended up managing Right Said Fred.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in a mad
So she was still into music.
Yeah. But anyway, that was a very, very long time ago. So that was just Saturdays from like 14.
But I mean, would you consider yourself to be classically trained in quotation marks?
Yeah, but that kind of almost implies, like you said, a kind of degree level, whereas mine just sort of stopped. I did the grades and all of that, but what I did love was being in any sort of ensemble where I could sort of be in the middle, like the glue, but not be out the front, which is weird because I do have a kind of solo persona, if you like. When I'm DJing, I feel like I can hold a stage. I've got a kind of quite, I don't know, fearsome presence. I've been told.
Okay.
I've been told. But actually the glue and the way of being in a band really suited me temperamentally. I just love, I kind of live inside the music. I think it's something I've always done, even just listening to it. I you know, someone asked me this the other day about a favourite album. And I was saying, well, I don't even need to listen to it. I can play the album note for note in my head. It's like there's a constant tape recorder running up there.
Okay.
So there's something about the detail in music. So like producing in the studio, I just hear all these different parts that fit together. And I like playing all the instruments.
Right. As you were saying that really reminded me of the first time I went in to record a demo with a band when I was a teenager. So I played guitar in bands when I was a teenager. I mean, the first time I went to a proper studio just to record a couple of tracks to send out to labels. And it's one of those ones where you hire a studio for a day. There's a kind of long suffering engineer who's like, oh God, who's this like bunch of teenage idiots who I'm going to have to spend the day recording. But the first time I was able to listen to parts separately, it almost ruined. Well, I think it did ruin music for me for a certain amount of years, because I after that session, I spent the whole time. So I really just went to the desk and was like immediately like drawn to the desk. I couldn't listen to music without picking out certain bits. Like I couldn't listen to a piece of music in its entirety, like in terms of the whole mix for years. It really, really messed with my head like that. But in a sort of similar kind of way. I mean, I have sort of got over that handicap now. I can see it. Yeah. But I mean, hearing being zoomed in on the details of something and being able to pick them apart, and that was such a important process for me to go through, and was just a extremely valuable, I suppose, set of lessons. But so when was the first time you made a track? If I can put it
no, that's a very good question. So actually, probably when I was a lot younger, because my dad also loved gadgets, so he played sax, but he also played keyboards. And from as long as I can remember, we had some sort of keyboard in the house. So we used to have this weird sort of Bontempi organ type thing, which had like little bossa nova rhythms on it. And all the taxi drivers used to come through the back of it. So it was covered in foil. It looked like this sort of alien had landed in the living room. And then he graduated. I don't remember all the various different ones, but I do remember in particular, a DX7. So that was the kind of king of keyboards in the 80s. And he bought a little sequencer to go with it. So as young as 12, 13, I was sort of fascinated with bands like Bronski Beat and Human League and Kraftwerk, and I taught myself how to use a little sequencer. And also, weirdly, when I was very young, some friends of my parents had a party, and they had a friend of theirs who was a prison officer. I mean, I don't know why I remember these details, but he was doing poetry over this music. And I remember coming home from the party. It was one where all the kids sneaked a bottle of wine off to a bedroom and did unspeakable things to each other up there. But I remember coming home being really inspired by this and just sitting at the piano and playing, writing some really awful poetry. So thank God there's no evidence of that now.
Teenage poetry.
But there's there's a template there for what then happened. And then years later, I met this proper character who used to be on Centre Force Radio, who I used to follow bizarrely, and I used to tape his shows off the radio. And I met him at this guy called Horace had a vinyl stall in middle of Camden Market. Started chatting over a pile of vinyl, which is actually how my world started, how I even met Rollo and so on, and even Maxi. It's all about piles of vinyl. And got chatting to him, and he sold me my first Atari and a crack copy of Cubase.
Oh, right.
And I stuck it in my mum's bedroom, and I just taught myself to use it.
Okay.
It was very intuitive and quite easy.
Sure.
And I had a little synthesizer, and that's how I made my real first demo, which I recorded onto cassette. Somehow I didn't work out the wiring properly, and it was all in mono. So it's just probably really crap. But somehow through raving or whatever, I ran into an old rave pal of mine who said, I've started a record label, and this is a guy called John Truelove who'd had big success with Candy Staten and The Source. It wasn't actually his record, it was Aaron and Josh, who were two DJs, and put the a cappella together to Candy Staten over Frankie Knuckles.
Yeah, right.
But he saw an opportunity, he watched it go off at various clubs, and he pressed it up, and that was the very first iteration of that record. And he was offered a label deal with Food, which had Blur at the time. Dave Balfe from the Teardrop Explodes was running it in Camden. And he ran a label called Synthetic, and he just signed Goldie, and he gave me studio time and an engineer on the strength of my really demo in mono on a cassette out of my mum's bedroom.
There must have been something there. But hang on a sec. What year in? This is like
91, 92.
Okay.
Maybe 92.
Okay.
So very early days. I was still probably at uni. It might have been during the holidays. Chronology's muddled because it was a long time ago. But around the same time, and I made a record with the engineer as Miss Bliss, and I was introduced to Rollo through a friend I met in Pure Groove, going through a bunch of vinyl, told him I was making tunes, and I got this Atari, and I just, taught myself how to use it. He goes, why don't we make a tune together? And then he said, my friend's a producer, and that was Rollo. So that was the very beginning of it all, really. But I'd already been putting out records before I met him.
Okay. Let's talk about that very first going into a studio with an engineer and making the first tune.
Yeah.
Did you have did you bring in ideas to the studio and then?
Yeah, I had my cassette, didn't I?
Oh, right.
I had my cassette
so
and
you were
my
basically
Atari.
so you were essentially recording
And I
something
had
you'd
a
already written.
sampler. I must have had a sampler because I have a vague memory of like bringing in all the floppy disks. But I also brought in loads of records and we sampled them. We used to sample beats and little snippets and put it together. I remember writing a melody in a traffic jam on the way down there in the bus.
Really?
On the way down to Camden. Wow. Yeah. It was the year of firsts. Also working with one of the engineers in this little studio above the record label. We got stuck. We'd been in there for hours. You know, I used to work till 2, 3 in the morning. You just don't notice time passing.
I mean,
but
like
he
I say,
took me for sushi and I'd never had sushi before. And there's a little place next to Camden Station. He goes, we need brain food because we got stuck with this mix. Like where the hell was the track going? Anyway, very early days, but weirdly there, some parts of it is very vivid because I was really making records and really getting them out to other DJs, which is what mattered in that period.
Yeah,
I had no idea of what the public were going to do with them. It was all about getting DJs to play your music.
Yeah, I mean, being an engineer in that kind of era because those things just don't exist anymore, right? Those sorts of studios with an in-house engineer and people going, it just doesn't happen now. In the same way.
At that time, I've always had my own setup. So I've had an Atari for years, and then I was working with Rollo loads in his studio, which is you probably read on the internet. I mean, it was in a garden shed in someone's back garden in Islington, filled with bottles of Lucasade and butts. It was a really stinky dark hole, but we made the Reverence album there pretty much, and we met Max, and it was the epicenter of, I suppose, our purple period.
Yeah, no, totally. No, but I mean, I think it's so many people I talk to, the first experience of making a track is that basically, like you go in, you have some ideas in your bedroom, and you go into somewhere which has got a desk and a bit of facilities, and crucially with someone there who knows how to sort of put it together and show you the ropes. Yeah. Basically. Actually, when I had MJ Cole on the show, he was one of those engineers initially. So it was really interesting talking to someone who'd gone a bit on both sides of it. Right. But I think those things are really important. And I think we've kind of lost something in the decline of those sorts of studios. Cause like I said, like, you know, my, as mentioned, formative experience in a dodgy indie band, driving an engineer.
You were brilliant.
We were not brilliant. Driving an engineer out the wall. But I mean, I really think that like there's knowledge which is imparted there, basically.
Yeah, right? Even without realizing it, I'm sure I was learning. I was always just sitting, watching, listening, without being a tape op, which is the name of the job you would have had in those kind of studios. And I got to work all over the place. I mean, I worked at Rollo. I had just all sorts of different opportunities came my way to do remixes. I remember going to Orinoco where Chemical Brothers recorded loads of stuff off the old Kent Road in the very early days. Just because DMC asked me to do a remix. So my name kind of started to get about from the very first records I made before I met Rollo. Because I suppose it was a bit of a novelty, but also I must have been giving out that cassette tape with reckless abandon.
You've got to be tenacious.
Somebody loved me.
It's important. That kind of stuff.
So there was a few little tunes that I was involved with. John Truelove got me to do, I suddenly remember this, a remix of Ryuichi Sakamoto's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
Okay.
I mean, it's so random, but you know, it was just all experience.
Sure.
And I mean, I have to say, even back then I was probably a bit of a mess. Like I just put everything into the track. I was a maximalist, not a minimalist.
Right.
And that's what's really interesting about working with Rollo is he's really good at picking out what should be the main part, whereas I can just hear all these tessellating musical parts and they all go in the pot. Right. You know, I'm much better now, but I didn't self-edit as it were back in the day. But it was all just so naive. And it was amazing. Again, the feeling, the rush of holding a piece of vinyl in your hand that had your name on it. And back in those days as well, things would get licensed to other companies. So it's a really big deal for me that my first ever record got licensed to Flying in Italy.
Oh, right,
and that was a label that was a real purveyor of fine, deep Italian house.
Absolutely.
So it felt like a
bit of an arrival. What's the name of that track?
It was called You're the Best Thing or Best Thing. I can't even remember now. Okay. But I did it under Miss Bliss because I was already doing a Sister Bliss record with someone else in Italy. So I had these relationships with these Italian producers and label owners. Do you remember DFC? put out Transformer 2 and
Yeah, vaguely.
Ramirez and
When I had-
Hell's Party.
When I had
So I got
Jane,
invited
when
to
I had Jane
speak
Fitz on
to-
the show, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
She's an absolute sort of archivist almost of that era of Italo music.
Oh, really?
The Italian House. Yeah. And she was just like firing these names at me. I was like, I thought I knew a little bit about this, but I definitely don't. But like, there's some
it's
amazing
the nerds'
stuff.
paradise, isn't it? That's
Absolutely.
what dance music is. It's like revenge of the nerds, and the nerds will inherit the earth. That's what I need that on a t-shirt, don't I? Really, because it was obsessive for me. The collecting of vinyl, the playing of it, the getting the gigs. It was all one thing. But as I say, there were these very early moments that included kind of, centre force, my passion for pirate radio. It's the only place you could hear dance music. Actually meeting someone who I listened to, who then, he was so dodgy. Oh my God, this guy. I won't say his name, but he used to have 909s and guns, and he'd sell them in loot. And he had a little studio in North London and said, oh, if you can come and play on my tunes, because he recognised, I must have given him the cassette. And he said, come round, and you can play on some of my tunes. And then he said to me, I'm going to own everything you do in perpetuity. If you just sign here, then I've got your publishing forever. And I just thought, it was completely naive. And I thought, I'm sure that doesn't sound right, but I didn't have anything to go on. But I'm so glad I didn't sign whatever it was he was sort of waving under my nose. But, there were some shonky early days. But how do you learn if not by all this crazy mad stuff? It's very funny in retrospect. I mean, it's funny that I'm even thinking of it with you. It's not something that comes to mind very often at all. But yeah, those early days were sketchy.
Yeah, totally.
But they were a lot, based around these relationships in record shops, the early promoters who gave me a chance, putting records out, suddenly having some sort of success, deciding not to go back to uni. So I was never studying music there. I was doing media studies.
Okay. Where?
So I dropped out, Birmingham.
Okay.
Well, I deferred. I'm still deferred.
Okay.
I could go back at any time,
Okay.
And I was DJing in Birmingham clubs as well.
Right. Anywhere?
Then I'd get asked back.
Anywhere notable that sticks in your mind?
I think the first one, I could barely mix at that point. I only had my decks for sort of 2 weeks, was Moseley Dance Centre, which is just a mad community centre that had the best raves in the 90s, and then proper club called Snobs. I remember, I think I was warming up for like Ali Whitehead. That was a big
that's a name
deal.
I haven't heard for a while.
Yeah, and the Basics crew, and then they heard me and invited me to Back to Basics. So I started touring quite a lot in the Midlands and the North, and just it really was word of mouth, cassette. I used to, write down my little CV that had 3 clubs that I played on and a begging letter.
Yeah.
It was also analog and funny, really.
So you mentioned...
I made the records to get the shows as well.
Got it.
Because I realised, for whatever reason, at the time, Todd Terry was really big. It's like, what does Todd Terry do?
Okay.
Oh, he makes records, and then he's got some press, and off the press, he then gets some shows. So I sort of started to see the connection,
Right.
and having some PR around the tracks I was doing. In fact, very early on, there was a woman called Nikki Tracks, and she ran a PR company, and I don't know who, it wasn't me, but someone must have paid her to do some PR for me.
Okay.
So then I had a few little articles here and there, which helped me get gigs.
Which in those days made a big difference, right? I mean, it's not quite the same now, but the press in those
my
days
gosh.
was, really, really significant, right? In fact, just last week on the show, we had Jono from Bugged Out, who was the editor of Jockey Star at the time, and Jockey Star was an awesome magazine, wasn't it?
Yeah,
And
very influential, massively. Them, Junior Boy Zone, obviously going back before that, DMC, Mix Mag to be in that club section.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something was sort of sad. I had to move my mum into a care home in 2024, and I had to pack up her house, and she kept everything in like plastic bags. It's like total fire hazard, but she called it the Museum of Bliss. And there she kept these early mix mags that we were in, with cassettes on the front. I couldn't believe it, all intact, all wrapped.
Really? Wow.
Probably worth something.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But there was just bags and plastic. But I was thinking, oh my God, what's all this rubbish? But I thought I better look inside them before I just bin everything. And it was this treasure trove of archive, the very, very first little mentions here and there.
Amazing.
Yeah. It was a really big deal. Music magazine, edited by Ben Turner,
Yeah, great.
or created by Ben, was really the big, what can I say, driver of Faithless early kind of coverage, because he worked at Melody Maker before and had kind of bigged us up in he ran a little column, and from that he went to creating this whole magazine that kind of challenged.
Music was great, wasn't it?
Yeah,
when it launched,
challenged
it was
Mixed Mag.
great,
It was a really big deal.
Great covers and really good editorial.
It had a real aesthetic.
Yeah.
It was a real proper nerd out as well.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
right.
So, again, this was another pivotal moment where I felt we got a lot of exposure in the dance community, and it was invaluable.
Totally. So you alluded to the starting of Cheeky Records, which is what the first few albums came out on, and obviously there was a major distribution deal, I believe, associated with that. But tell me about starting it, because it sounded like it was a bit of a back of the envelope, down the back
It
of
was
the
just
safe
chaos.
type thing.
Well, my mum designed the label. She was an artist.
So who was it? So it's you,
It's me and Rollo at the time.
right? Just the two of you,
Just the two of us, and the first record that we made together with me singing on it, which is just
really?
wretched. But it was catchy. It was catchy, and we pressed up God knows how many vinyl, because we knew distributors and stuff, but we were so wrecked the whole time. We just didn't get ourselves together to distribute this record. So I had a little flat and I just couldn't move because it was full of boxes of vinyl that we had yet to get on the vans.
Yeah, right.
As I say, there was this immediacy back in the day where you could just press something up because there was so many vinyl pressing plants, which
it wasn't
exactly
like
you have to go to the Czech Republic now, and you have to 6 months.
Quite.
The lead time on pressing vinyl is so long now. It's really changed the nature of that. And meanwhile, vinyl's having this mad little resurgence. But anyway, back in the day, we started Cheeky Records to distribute the first record we made, and I think we called ourselves Jelly Jam.
Okay.
I don't know why. God, it's an awful name. Just awful. Just everything about it was awful. It had a good riff in it.
Okay.
So I was still doing good riffs, and it had me singing on it, which was just awful. So, perhaps that's why we did that. Maybe there was some sort of unrecognised shame, and that's why we didn't get ourselves together to actually put it on the vans. But yeah, that was the beginning of Cheeky Records, and we were so sort of disorganised. Then Rollo had done another record with another collaborator of his, Rob D, and it was above a track in the Cool Cuts chart, or one of the DMC charts, that was on Champion Records. So Champion was the home of actually Todd Terry back in the day, Salt and Pepper Push It, Robin S, Show Me Love was a massive hit, and Mel Medali, who ran it, was like the only independent who hadn't kind of sold out to a major. He ran out of this tiny little house in Harlesden. He was a total maverick. He used to employ Paul Oakenfold as a scout.
Oh, right.
He signed Will Bloody Smith when he was the Fresh Prince of
Oh, really?
Bel-Air.
Okay.
Yeah, and he saw Rollo's record above his in the chart and thought, who's this upstart? Pulled him into the office and then offered him a label deal. So he thought, well, why don't we do Cheeky with Mel? Because he actually knows how to put records out and how to turn a profit.
Always helps.
So I was like, yeah, I don't think we're doing a brilliant job of it. Yeah, let's do that then. So the label became 50% Rollo, 50% Mel.
Right.
And we used it to release all the different records we were making together. So we'd do a Sister Bliss record for me. Then we'd do the series of records called Rollo Goes. We did Rollo Goes Camping, Rollo Goes Mystic, Rollo Goes Spiritual.
Yeah, right.
And in the middle of it all, we met Maxi. So we thought, as people do in dance music, you have all these different monikers for your different projects.
Yeah. That was definitely the fashion of the time anyway. It's a little bit different now, isn't it? But
But when we met Max, it was late 93, early 94.
Okay. And what was he doing?
He was in his own band called Soul Food Cafe. He was doing kind of UK hip hop, but he'd also done some hip house for Tam Tam that had like Homeboy, Hippie and a Funky Dreg. You know, that Total Confusion, rave classic. So he was on that label briefly, as well as I think like Talking Loud, sort of acid jazz, Giles Peterson. He was also in a band with a jazz keyboard player that I used to follow called Jason Rebello, and he's a genius. He was like touted as the next big thing, really beautiful young man, like sort of Jamie Cullum character. But then he suddenly had a nervous breakdown and went off to be a monk.
Okay.
And just like left the music business.
Fair enough.
He's still in it now, but he was going to be huge. And Max was in his band.
Okay.
But my mum always likes to say that she discovered Max because she saw him doing some gig with Jason Rebello at like the Barbican, I think.
Okay.
And came home waxing lyrical about it. I said, I think we're in the studio with him next week. So
right.
through this guy that I'd met in Pure Groove over a pile of vinyl, that we recorded that Jelly Jam, I think it was called, record together, because Rollo was his mate, and he said, I've met this Buddhist rapper from Brixton.
Okay.
And that was Max.
Right.
And we were getting quite frustrated with, we were having a bit of a purple period as Rollo and Sister Bliss. We were really in demand for remixes.
Yeah.
I started playing keyboards on loads of tracks. We did this Rollo Goes series. We did a bunch of Sister Bliss records, and everything started feeling, what we call handbag house, very handbaggy, bit Nelly.
I remember
bit
it at the
cheesy,
time.
and we were like, don't really like the direction of this, even though we probably contributed to it. And we'd always had this feeling, especially like being like reggae fans as well, that there was this sense of protest music, and you could change people's hearts and minds. Like, you had this audience whose hearts were open and their minds were open. And Left Field came along and did Open Up with John Lydon. We were like, a game-changing record for us. And bands like Underworld as well, the way that they delayed and delayed, they allowed this hypnotic process to happen in music, what we would call progressive house.
Sure.
Not what is commonly now known in the EDM world as progressive.
Right.
No. We're talking about these amazing records that weren't kind of poppy, often didn't have a vocal, sometimes purely instrumental, that unfurled in this incredible way. And that was very influential to us. And we felt we wanted dance music to, our dance music, our music to have that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And in meeting Maxi was pivotal, because he had a lyrical agenda, and how he talked about his life and his philosophy as a Buddhist was fascinating. So like, well, can you put that in a lyric? And he was like, oh, all right then. It was so kind of like, really, when he came to the studio, because it wasn't like a band, like maybe your band, you'd all been at school together and you'll know each other and wind each other up and have in-jokes. We've got all that now after 30 odd years. But at the time, we were really getting to know each other.
Yeah, the first time you get in the studio with people you don't know, it's a little bit scary, isn't it?
It's like taking your pants down. You feel really exposed.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they're going to know I'm crap.
Yeah, exactly. But but was there, sounds like there was chemistry immediately.
There was.
Yeah.
There was. Although I have very vague memories of it. I remember we all smoked an awful lot. It was just a fug of smoke. I even remember when, later we only got together to make one single, and after, really going deep with the lyrics, which were about being so frustrated you couldn't live in your own skin.
Well, what was the
that
first?
became Salva Mia.
Right.
It's a very uncompromising piece of music. Basically, Rollo and I were still working on Ataris, and we found the button that slowed it down in the middle. Okay. And I remembered when I heard French Kiss, and that blew my mind, Little Louis, like Sunrise Rave in like 88, 89. It was again a pivotal moment where everything just went. And suddenly we found the button that did the thing, because it wasn't like the Atari came with a manual and I'd had this crack copy of Cubase. It wasn't a legal.
Right, you can't go on YouTube to find out.
No. You had to work all this wild stuff out on your own. So we had this record that had this kind of like really pulsating house at the beginning. We had this riff. And then we had this section that slowed down into a kind of hip hop, but quite a grinding, aggressive hip hop, not kind of light and fluffy. And then we found the speed up button, and then it went back out into house at the end of the record. Yeah. So we thought, well, why don't we get this Buddhist rapper down that Ben keeps mentioning, our mutual friend, and see if he'll, do a rap over this particular section, this groove. And after just chatting on his philosophy way into the night, then the lyrics came after that. And also Max was quite impressed that Rollo asked him to write about frustration, because he said, most producers, they want the hands in the air kind of lyrics. So for him, it was quite refreshing. So he thought, God, who are these people? Right. All right, I'll give it a go. Anyway, that record got signed by Island, and then it sat on a shelf and they didn't release it because they didn't know what to do with it. So we were actually signed to the legendary Island Records for a nanosecond.
Yeah. The classic major label so far.
Yeah, we got really frustrated, and we had a clause that said we could have it back after 60 days if they didn't release it. Right. So we got it back, and thought, what have we got Cheeky for? Why don't we put the record out on Cheeky? But why don't we do an album with Max? He's so interesting, and that's how it all came together, really. We said, well, do you want to come back to the studio? So we'd done Salva Mia, but we didn't make the album for at least another 6-7 months afterwards. It didn't even occur to us, because we We'd never made an album, so it wasn't
Well-
like the album format where we're all comfortable in our happy place now.
Yeah.
It was a total adventure and a very naive one at that.
How long did it take to make, once you decided to do it, how long roughly did it?
Well, legend said 17 days.
Okay.
So maybe it was. Maybe what we did was we did a lot of work in the garden studio. No idea how long for, but we used to get this, what you'd call dead time in the studio where other people weren't using it for
Right,
like,
sure.
midnight till they came back again at midday.
Yeah.
So
That's when most of the early MJ Cole tunes were made, when he was in
exactly.
his
You're
time,
kind of blagging this free studio time or much cheaper studio time. And we got to record in an SSL studio. So it's a really beautiful mixing desk. In a place called Swanyard, and it was tucked behind Highbury Station.
Okay.
And we just blagged the studio time there. So perhaps we did the expensive 17-day bit and the mixing.
But you've done a fair bit of writing in advance.
Yeah, I think we must have done. But as I say, it's all so hazy. Very, very hazy.
I mean, it's a long time ago, to be fair.
And when we asked Max to record Insomnia, it was to balance out the record because, as you said, gosh, it's not that, Faithless isn't really that dancey.
Yeah, no, it's really not.
And that's what we needed for Reverence. We had Salva Mea, which was this quite uncompromising piece of music, which was, now it's sort of looked at as a sort of iconic banger. And Insomnia was made to kind of balance that side. The other side of the record, if you're doing record as an A and a B side, which we were, that's how we conceived the whole thing.
Yes, absolutely. As albums were done in those days because of the format, right? Because of vinyl and tapes, I suppose. So I'm just kind of remembering, as mentioned, sort of teenager at the time, first hearing about Faithless, and I'm sure that I'd already heard of Rollo and Sister Bliss, and that was kind of like that was the kind of hook me. Oh, these guys are doing a band now, kind of thing. But how long did it take for it to catch on? Because I mean, obviously, Insomnia became huge, but it wasn't immediate, was it?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
It was making waves off the back of the vans, these limited, vinyl pressings. And it actually entered the charts on its first release, maybe number 28. We thought that was amazing. And we've gone on to do another project.
Do you mean talking about the single?
Yeah. But it's, we sold no albums at all.
Yeah.
Like we'd get the figures in from Mel at Champion, and he was like, "You've sold 16 copies this week." And we thought that was amazing. We're like, God, who are these people? It was amazing. And also because we were so naive, we're very into aesthetics and how tactile things are. And we chose this cardboard cover for Reverence. It didn't actually fit in the racks. So
this is the
back
classic
in the
mistake,
day,
isn't it?
you have racking for your CDs and your vinyl. And it wouldn't fit in the slot. And it's now obviously a collector's item. But we didn't know that at the time. So everyone was spinning out. And there was only 4 people working at the label, but all 4 people were spinning out because we'd done this stupid, mistake.
Isn't there I think there's Alice Cooper album or something that made the same mistake, and they spent just, millions on this crazy sleeve, and then it just wouldn't fit. And if it doesn't fit, then you're not getting the racking. And if you're not getting the racking,
on the floor in a little pile.
Yeah.
So we had Radio Plugs at the time who had taken Insomnia up to Radio 1, probably Salva Mea as well. We'd had a lot of support from Pete Tong, but in that era, there was no dance music on daytime at all. We were told it didn't have a chorus, it didn't have a hook, and to go away. So the Pluggers, in their desperation, said, look, if you do a gig, just one gig, it will really help us tell the story that the album exists, that there is a whole album and it's not just dance music.
You mean a Faithless gig?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we had a bunch of stoner mates hanging out at the studio working on different projects and put together totally chaotically and ridiculously this 10-piece live band. I mean, it was a behemoth. We didn't even all fit on the stage. We managed to book a gig at the Jazz Cafe, which is now the Stuff of Legend. And the record was building, but abroad, because of the system I spoke about earlier. You could be on an independent label in the UK, and then you would license your track to people who loved it in different territories like Scandinavia, Germany, Benelux, which was Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. So they collectively were called the gas territories: Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Benelux, which was those territories. So there was a label for each of them. And in each of those territories, Insomnia started going up the charts. So we'd released it and had sort of a modicum of success, but not that much. Yeah. Anyway, so this was the context of doing the gig. By the time the gig came round, it was quite a hot ticket. We had like Oki and Sasha were outside. I remember being in the dressing room having to like lob their tickets out the window because it was such a scrum to get in, because it only holds like 400 people. Dido was in the band at the time.
Oh, right. Okay.
Doing vocals.
Right.
So, I mean, it was just nuts. Like I say, we barely fit on a stage. Music magazine was there. They did a lovely article on it.
This was in 96, is that right?
Yeah. Or was it even earlier than that? Maybe 95. But yeah, the first gig was just madness. Like I say, we barely fit on the stage.
How much rehearsing had you done?
Don't remember.
Okay.
A couple of weeks, a week, don't know. Just wish I could remember. It was a really dirty, horrible studio in Holloway that we rehearsed in there, and it sounded awful. Right. But it must have delivered something. You know, Maxi was naturally charismatic. And I do remember what he wore, because Jamie, the photographer for Music magazine at the time, came and did the photos of the show, and he had this like maroon string vest or raspberry colour and a raspberry shirt and Nike to match, and maybe some raspberry coloured jeans as well. And he just was like a vision in raspberry. But, you know, quintessentially cool from...
I mean, if you have a charismatic frontman, it's an enormous advantage, isn't it, with any kind of live act, right?
Exactly. So. And I found those photos in the bottom of a wardrobe a few years ago, which was just incredible. You know, what a little slice of history. So that was our first gig at the Jazz Cafe. And then our labels that we'd licensed the album to in different territories found out we had a band. I'm like, can you come to Germany? Can you come to Switzerland?
Yeah, exactly.
So totally out of the blue, this chaotic band. We had no management at the time either. We ended up going all around Europe, and it was just a mad jam. It really was.
With a 10-piece band?
Yeah. It was absolutely nuts, with no tour support either.
Yeah, right. I was going to say, because I mean, that's an expensive project.
Me and Maxi didn't pay ourselves for the first 5 years to just allow the band to be able to make a living. So what can I say? They were like a baptism of fire. And we only realised we were any good when we'd done a massive gig that got upgraded from like 1,000 to 5,000 at a Mercedes factory with the Fujis.
Oh, right.
You know. And we heard ourselves back on the radio that recorded the show. And we sat on a tour bus. Again, they gave us a cassette and we listened to it. Like, this is quite good, isn't it? You know, we had no sense of what it was. So all I can say is I had a lot of imposter syndrome that still continues at times to this day. But yeah, those early days were absolutely nuts, bizarre, chaotic, probably fun, very stressful. But I guess groundbreaking in some way to be able to take dance music that was very club based and put it in a very different arena and have people come and say to us, we don't like dance music, but we like you.
Did you always have a live drummer?
Yes. It was Maxi's insistence actually, because he'd done all this hip house stuff, and he was like, I don't want to just mime over a DAT tape, which was the kind of
what was done at the day, the live PA.
Yeah, the live PA. Although I saw lots of great live PAs back in the day, lots of fun. In fact, I did them when I was doing some Sister Bliss stuff with some mad and a singer. Anyway, less about that. So, yeah, Max was like, if we are going to do this, I definitely want it to have a live component. So we were like, all right then. He was kind of driving that.
Sure.
And I thought, God, I hadn't been in a band since I was in school, where a bit like you, it was sort of an indie band, but a bit electronic, but I played bass guitar. I wasn't even playing keyboards in that band. Yeah. So I hadn't actually been in a band at all. So, you know, what a band to be in, eh?
Totally.
Lucky.
Yeah, right. I mean, before this all blew up, had you had any kind of serious, I suppose, ambition to be, I want to say famous. I'm not sure if that's quite the right word. Were you thinking about it at all in those kinds of terms?
No, I wanted to be the best DJ in the world.
Okay.
So yes, I had that ambition.
Yeah.
I absolutely did. And I worked very, 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 very hard. And I knew, and I would hear DJs. I'd be like I'd be blown away by certain people's skills, and then like confounded as to why other people had such a big name, and they just sort of,
I mean, you know, we all know those
some
people,
bloated, miserable looking bloke in a black t-shirt. I'm like, really?
I mean, I'm not one to criticize blokes in black t-shirts, but yeah.
No. I mean, it was quite a sexist era. All I can say is,
No
there
doubt.
was a period of putting women on not because of sort of diversity and inclusion or anything quite so fabulously woke. It was because you want a Dolly Bird on the lineup, and it was sort of really patronising, because I knew some really good female DJs, people that were my heroes and people that gave me so much support.
Give me some examples. Who are your kind of...
Well, on the gay scene, Princess Julia and Rachel Auburn really kind of adopted me, and I went to all these incredible places and played, like Café de Paris, Kinky Galinky, where Lee Bowery was, a fixture there, performance artist. I was mixing with a much more, I'd say, creative crowd. There was this melding of rave and the kind of mixed gay culture, and that was very inspiring, I'd say, and brought a bit of colour to everything. But still at heart, I was a bit of an old school hardcore raver as well. So
let me ask that question. What was the first rave you went to? Proper rave.
Proper rave would be Sunrise.
Yeah.
Yeah, at
89.
White Waltham.
89.
I think it was 89.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to warehouse parties. Used to go to all sorts of crazy parties in East London.
Yeah.
And I just passed my driving test. That was 1987, 88. And my friend could read an A to Z. I'd still have to say I'm really rubbish at reading an A to Z. So she'd navigate and I'd drive, find these places. Well, we used to go raving on the night bus, and it was such a revelation to be able to drive. Oh my God. This is in the days when you could drive in London and you weren't penalised at every corner.
20 mile an hour speed limit's not going so what was Sunrise like? Tell me about Sunrise. Give me what your pertinent memories of Sunrise.
Oh, I have a lot of them, actually. A lot of them. Going in a convoy, losing the
so this is the
party
quintessential
starters for the
rave,
night.
right?
This is the quintessential
Orbital rave. Yeah, was it?
orbital. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be. But it was still on the M4 rather than the M25. But it was what can I say? There was up the North Circular. You could see into the car windows. You knew who was going down. Hazard a guess, who was bopping along. What can I say? It was amazing. It was the first time I took ecstasy. It was
always a memorable experience.
My car broke down. I lost my voice.
Okay.
We drank a lot of Ribena. Little Louis got played. My head exploded. Everybody loved each other.
Do you remember any other specific tunes apart from French Kiss?
Oh, there was loads of them. Dion, Come Get Your Lovin'. Doug Lazy, Let It Roll, probably. Things like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to think of right now. There's probably a video of it somewhere.
No doubt.
Could go down memory lane, but I try and avoid those.
Were you aware?
I remember what I wore as well.
Okay, what did you wear?
I had a caftan. No, it's really naffy. My mum's caftan with flary sleeves and a kind of ornate Indian pattern.
It was 1989.
Baggy chinos and Converse.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was a look.
Were you aware of any DJs who were playing? This is a question which is always interesting.
I think Carl Cox was playing.
Okay.
I think Judge Jules was playing. Maybe Bushwhacker was playing. Bizarrely, I've got the original flyer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I found it in a folder in my studio.
Okay.
Along with my first ever Glastonbury wristband from 1987.
Awesome.
Kind of crazy, huh?
Yeah.
I kept this little bit. I mean, I have to say my mum's a hoarder, so having cleared out the bags and bags of the Museum of Bliss, I think I've inherited it.
We're a little bit pushed for time.
Okay.
So I want to just finish up with coming back to the start. Just tell me about coming back to the new record. The making of it, obviously very different to doing it in a shed out the back of Rollo's house. I mean, the way in which music is made now has changed fundamentally. The whole AI thing has become a really pertinent issue. Not necessarily just generating tracks, but using AI and plugins, all that kind of stuff. From a sort of technical perspective, what are your general observations about what it's like to make music now? And maybe the pros and cons of the developments, yeah?
I'd say the cons are, when is something finished? There are so many plugins, there are so many multiple ways to do things so many kind of sonic adventures you can go on, so many samples to check out, even within Apple loops, for example, before you've even bought a sample pack. There is this, what can I say? It's like a soup that you have to kind of wade through to find the essence of something. So the kind of sense of sonic adventure is exciting on one hand, but yet it makes finishing things really, really quite difficult. I would also say that kind of digital process, I think you have to work really hard with the mix in a way that perhaps we didn't. We threw things together in a more intuitive way, but now everything goes through a function one, and the way that decks are set up, the whole kind of digital interface, and the way we master now, this kind of maxing out kind of, limiters, smashing the limiters.
It's all a lot more scientific.
Everything's so loud, but you also need it to be contained because the systems themselves gives you so much bass. So we find mixing actual club tracks a real headache. Sometimes we just now pay someone else to do it,
which is
because
completely
the
fine.
Fiddling with the bottom end and the kick,
endless.
Oh my God, you'd think after 30 years we'd have it locked down. But you see, we used to work with an engineer as well as doing a lot of engineering ourselves, and then it became unaffordable because then, so again, the cons are the income from releasing music is pretty negligible. The income from touring and performing is what keeps us going. That's how we survive. But unfortunately, the absolutely terrible deal artists have got in the world of streaming means that, it's great to have a presence. It's great to still have an audience. But my God, if we were just releasing music into the world of streaming, we'd have to give up our studios tomorrow, wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage. It's just not a sustainable model. So in brief, those are the sort of pros and cons, where, the production of the music is tied to the expense of making it, to the, what you're likely to make back after all that effort. Literally I've just had some masters cut today because we are about to release a new club EP. Very excited to release some cuts outside of an album, which is not something we've done for a long time. And we've just made some really club focused tracks, which I'm super excited about. But we're having them mastered 3 times because it's just like, oh God, is it a bit distorted? And have we sorted the bottom end out? And is it us or is it them? Or, so we've just gone, oh my gosh, it's a real headache. And we're both sitting there with it cranked up to 11 going, well, how does it sound in your studio? So, it takes us longer to make music now, I think, not just because life gets in the way. We're parents and we have kids and all their mad little lives to deal with, but just because there is so much more work technically, so much more refining of each sonic component that goes in, and we use live as well. So we're not just doing everything off of sample packs and synthesizers. There's a live component as well. And I think for us, the sound of Faithless that is, or was quite distinct, is this sense of grandeur and an epic vibe. And I'd say a little bit of that came from, in the early days, using an SSL to mix, that separated all the sound out in a particular way and had these particular EQs. And back in the day, we were all mixing on like Spirit, was it Soundcraft Sapphire? So, but some of my favourite records were mixed on the smallest, crappiest desks. It's always about an idea, isn't it? But I'd say now that the music is sort of precision engineered. It's very clean, it's very crisp. Absolutely. It has this huge separation and it's very, very loud. And some of our music is more nuanced and more textured, and we don't also want that to get lost. So it's a fine balance between what makes Faithless. And of course, Maxi was a defining element of that. And that marriage of sort of spoken word and epic, euphoric, yet melancholic backing tracks. So for me, it's always, and Rollo, we're always battling to have the warmth that Faithless has and the epic sense, but without, I suppose, it becoming this cliche, because so many people have kind of done our sound, the big drop, the huge riff, EDM kind of like paraphrased our sound in a way.
Not in a good way, unfortunately.
No.
Let me ask you one more. I had this theory that basically every musician of any level of success, even the most successful musicians, tend to be defined by a really small amount of their repertoire, like 1 or 2 tracks.
Just Insomnia.
And this is, well, I mean, but I think this is true from like, you know, Vivaldi to, you know, David Bowie to, you know, whoever. And obviously, with you guys, it's Insomnia, it's Scott as a DJ for the most part. I think those two, that's what people I think. And it's that kind of big trancey, clubby sound. But as we mentioned at the start, that's really not that representative of the catalogue as a whole. I mean, do you agree with that? And you know, how do you feel about that? If you're, I mean, is it just like, I'm grateful that people like it, and any sort of like, you know, of that kind of recognition is a blessing, or is it a little bit frustrating?
No, I think it's the latter, the former. It's the former.
Okay.
It is absolutely incredible. People wait their whole lives to have a record that was as globally successful as Insomnia, and it wasn't an overnight success. And I think the fact that we've put other music, I suppose, with conscious lyrics around that's like the gateway drug. That's the door that has allowed us to open into all these other worlds, to having an audience, to be able to make whatever it is, 8 albums, to do soundtracks and scoring, which is something I love doing. You know, that has been the key as well. With, I'd say, the tireless work we've done live. You know, we really have gone round the world
and those are hard yards,
dragging our sorry asses from here to there, you know. And I feel in some ways in the live arena, people are very surprised about the contrast and the different kind of, you know, genres that we bring, but hopefully making it all one kind of coherent whole. So I'd say, yeah, total gratitude. I'm not frustrated. I'd love people to listen to all of our music. So thank you for doing that the other night. You know, especially some of the chilled stuff I think is really, really beautiful. Awesome. And it's a big part of me and our music making process for sure. And maybe that's what makes Faithless more enduring, is that it goes beyond the dance floor, and that you can listen to albums in all sorts of different contexts. And like I say, I still love the album format, and I still love the vinyl format. So, you know, may analog reign.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been great.
Oh, thank you. Brilliant interview. Awesome. Cheers.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.